Hello, and welcome to another fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinsey. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today I have my good friend and fellow hacker, Alex Lin, on the stream with me. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
So, typically on this show, we will take your questions live in the chat. And by the way, hello to everybody who is in the chat today, such as Josh, Daniel, My Hacker Tech, and of course, our Bedrock, Zam. It's good to see all of you, and if you have any questions you would like us to answer, go ahead and post them in the chat, or if you are watching this on replay, you can always go ahead and leave it in the comments, because we will be going through and answering all these questions every week, as well as going through the questions on our YouTube videos on Hack5, of which we get a lot, especially Alex, on your second to last Log4j episode, which now has lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of comments and questions and other sorts of things.
That one's popping off.
Yeah, and also I understand you are now getting personal inquiries as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things I often joke about is how my message request section on Twitter is full of people asking me to participate in scams, unlock their girlfriend's iPhone, get into their locked out Instagram account that they just can't figure out how to get back into. Like, these are all things that I get all the time. And now Alex, having had a hit video on Hack5, is getting some really great messages as well. So if you have any questions for Alex that are not cybercrime related, unfortunately we can't answer specific questions about how to enable your tech scam, but we can help you out with any hacking related questions. So please feel free to drop them on any of the videos or in the chat.
One of the weirdest emails I got, I think like last week, some guy just emailed me one line that said, "Hello sir, I saw your hacking video. I'm lonely." That was just the whole subject.
One thing that we are here for is to, make you feel a little bit less alone in the hacker space. So that's not really a question, but it is a nice statement that maybe we make some people feel a little bit less alone, although maybe not all the way for everyone. Sorry, we can't do it all. So we've had a couple different videos come out on Hack5 this week. And I have been focusing on CircuitPython, which is a really awesome Python 3-based language for microcontrollers that is supported by Adafruit. And they have lots of really talented developers and community members who are putting lots of interesting features into their products. And I've been exploring kind of CircuitPython for hacking over the last couple of weeks. So if you have any questions about doing microcontroller hacking stuff with Python on these little cheap microcontrollers, then feel free to ask, because that's been what I've been focusing on a lot. Alex, what have you been focusing on?
I've been working on new features for the Wi-Fi nugget. We're working on a software. Well, this is only the shell of a Wi-Fi nugget, not exactly the nugget itself. I've been working on a piece of software called the Nugget Defender, which is like a network defense tool that you can use to detect hackers using your Wi-Fi nugget.
So we have a question. Oh, also, sorry, not to cut you off. And also, of course, your Log4j video. So if people have any questions about Log4j, I mean, it's been a while now, but it is still around, and you're still going to hear it in the news for a while. Yeah. So Alex has done 2 separate videos on Log4j now. One of them is focused on how you can exploit an old version of Ghidra. So you can actually do the exploit, and it's kind of fun to poke into an NSA program and use that as your target. Because what are they going to do? They've already hacked everyone. And then the second one actually shows how you can use a canary token in order to detect vulnerable applications that might just be around your computer or any services you use, which is pretty cool. Although the canary token server went down literally the day we published it. So a lot of people were a little confused and grumbly about that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our questions today. One question that we have in the chat from Daniel Smith is, in your opinion, what is the best entry-level certification for a beginning career in cybersecurity? Second semester cybersecurity student here. So it's going to be controversial because I don't actually work most of the time in incident response or something. So I still think that the number one certification class that prepared me for basic security stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis would be the routing and switching class I took still. It just gives me a better understanding of how computers work in networks and how these kind of larger infrastructures are maintained and built, and how to design my own. And even though it's not a security-focused certification, I learned so much about infrastructure. It really, I feel prepared me for a lot more networking roles and a lot more security roles than a purely security-focused education would have, if that's what I'm going into. And I'm kind of more focused on network stuff, specifically with Wi-Fi. So for me, that was a big step forward. And it was a way that I could prove to employers that, hey, I already know a lot about this topic. I can construct a network, I can tear it down, and I can understand how it's attacked and how to defend it. So I don't think you're gonna hear a lot of people saying like a routing and switching certificate is like a good way to get into cybersecurity, but for me, it really was, and it was an eye-opening class because I had a really excellent teacher who cared about the subject a lot. So I know, Alex, you don't have any certifications either, but do you know about any that you would recommend?
I did take like a few free courses in preparation for stuff like CompTIA or CCNA. I found those really useful, and I think they would sort of be on the same level as probably that routing and switching class you took. Of course, I'm not certified, so I won't give advice on something I'm not qualified to, but I highly recommend those, or at least taking like preparation courses for those, because that taught me like the fundamentals of a lot of what I know about networking.
So another question from the chat is, what is forensics good for? So forensics is actually really cool because a lot of people know how to use computers, but they don't necessarily know like the details of how all these things run and store data and what kinds of information you can find when there's been some sort of incident. So there's lots of different opportunities you can get with forensics, anything from like crime investigation all the way to incident response, where you could be working for a large company to discover like which rogue employee leaked some data, or maybe like there's lots of different things you can imagine like the government would be interested in when it comes to reverse engineering like a piece of malware or figuring out where something came from that's maybe wreaking a lot of havoc around the world, like something like WannaCry, for example, like trying to figure out where that came from and doing reverse engineering on that and doing forensics on it is a really interesting way of getting into the cybersecurity kind of realm. But it is pretty specific, so I myself have not done a lot of it. But I would say, like, if I was super interested in forensics, then those are some of the career paths you can go down. Law enforcement obviously heavily relies on experts to be able to look into information, because a lot of these investigators have no idea what they're doing when it comes to computers, and they really need people that understand the way that they can gather evidence on a system. So not particularly my bag, but it's definitely something that a lot of people go into. And I mean, it's once you learn a lot about these systems and you get comfortable with them, it's not that hard when you know where to look for information and what kinds of information is retained on things like different types of storage media. So really fun and cool. All right, so let's go ahead and pick one from the channel.
Cool. All right.
The F in forensics stands for fun, says Zam. All right, I'm not sure if that's completely serious, but I guess we'll see.
Let me just queue up the questions here. It's taking a second. All right.
Okay.
So this is from, I think, our live stream last week. Oh, no, this is from one of my Canary Tokens videos. Are any of you messing with the Canary Tokens website? It won't load for me. That was due to the very unfortunate timing where Canary Tokens took down their server on the exact day I published my video, and also revoked like 2 weeks worth of public access keys to their servers. Which really sucks.
Yeah, so it looks like they beefed up their servers in order to account for the Log4j thing, in order to offer a new type of free token. And they didn't anticipate how many people would be using it. And in the end, it ended up crashing the server, and they weren't able to get back any of the tokens that had been created for like a 2-week period. So my older tokens are still working, but all the ones that were created prior to that will need to be recreated, which is, I know, kind of annoying. But hey, it is a free service, so like we can't really knock on Canary Tokens for like not like having 100% uptime for their free service. Like, what are you going to get a refund? So anyway, it was a really cool video, just marred by unfortunate timing of having that server go down and then lose all the tokens prior to it the very same day.
Right. Were your Nugget tokens affected by that?
No, they were not, thankfully. My Nugget tokens were not affected by that. Yeah, so I've been working on having our Wi-Fi Nugget trigger Canary tokens in order to do things like act like a honeypot on a local network. So that would have set my research back if all of my honeypot tokens got broken. So one question from the chat is, how do you guys keep track of the latest hacking news? Besides bookmarking every news site. So I actually find out about stuff from the news like very rarely. Like sometimes I'll be scrolling on the news and see like a hacking related thing that I haven't already heard of on Twitter. But frankly, like Twitter is a really good source of information for me. I get my InfoSec news mostly on Twitter and a little bit on TikTok by following people who like cover breaking news and are really plugged into the research community and all these little niche groups that I myself maybe don't have any direct relation to. But by following people involved in Hackaday, I learn a lot about hardware news and breaking news. By following people that are more associated with cybersecurity, then I learn more about breaking computer science stuff. And then with networking, I can see people who are looking at mass scanning and what people are looking for. And then reverse engineering shows me what kinds of ransomware is out there and what's happening. So having people that I'm following that are different parts of the cybersecurity spectrum and listening to the news that they're retweeting. There's a lot of really good accounts that retweet information that is super, super pertinent to that specific niche of cybersecurity. And you probably won't find it unless everybody gets offended at the same time, because that also happens on Twitter a lot. But generally, I would say that following people who retweet information about their specific niche and finding experts who represent areas you're interested in, like reverse engineering. Maybe you should try Marcus, Malware Tech. He is doing a series on getting started with reverse engineering. So if you're interested in reverse engineering news, then you should probably follow him. There's people like that that represent their spheres of influence really, really well. And that's where I get a lot of my information. So I would recommend following people that you respect and like as sources on Twitter. And you'll find that they often retweet a lot of stuff related to their industry that just kind of is useful for people who might not take that deep of a dive down in those areas all the time. So, but yeah, it's pretty easy to stay up on hacking news if you follow the right people. So I would recommend Twitter as a news source, provided you're following people that are credible in the industry and you're vetting your sources, because you can't take it at face value all the time.
I gotta say I'm definitely more involved in the maker community on Twitter, but Twitter is definitely a great news source, and their algorithm seems to be pretty honed at feeding you stuff related to what you want to see. But besides that, I also do have bookmarked a lot of different hacking news sites, like the ones we use for our weekly newsstream. You're on Instagram and I'm not. Do you get any InfoSec or maker news, or is that just people showing off? I just get a bunch of hot garbage on Instagram.
Yeah, me too.
That's all I got.
Me too. Say. Instagram thinks I'm very trashy and recommends a bunch of stuff that I don't like at all, so I just mostly don't go.
TikTok also hasn't figured me out yet, so I just haven't had the mental capacity to scroll through enough TikToks to get it to customize my feed.
So Daniel asked a question, would you say that all the best jobs in security/hacking are government related, or what are some great private sector hacking and cybersecurity employers that you know of? We actually did a Hack 5 video, which perhaps our producer could queue up, that is talking about switching, different public versus private jobs in cybersecurity and getting into security and kind of comparing it. And it was a really interesting look into public versus private, which is the way to go if you are into cybersecurity and you want to have a good job. So there's trade-offs. And we spoke to someone who was this fantastic trans woman who used to work in law enforcement and switched over to working at Rapid7. And she was saying that the people who she was working with in the public sector and law enforcement were kind of old school, and they were not always very respectful, and she didn't really feel totally comfortable being herself in the workplace. And this is something that if you don't fit the mold for this kind of job, sometimes if you go into these old school environments where the government is used to operating in a certain way and they're slow to change, it can be I would say unpleasant experience for people who want to be more free to express themselves and maybe are a little bit different. So if you are someone who's a little bit different, then there are companies that absolutely celebrate that, and their salaries tend to be maybe a little better sometimes. So that being said, it's very honorable to serve the country and work in government positions, and the benefits are great and the pay is pretty good. But the private sector almost always wins when it comes to salaries, when it comes to the kind of people who might not fit into a government job but are extremely talented. So there's definitely trade-offs. Often you'll find that you will make more money and have a better work environment in the private sector. The public sector, though, certainly has advantages like stability and the ability to have really interesting things to work on. So, it is a trade-off. I've heard people that have gone both ways. And then also some people kind of split it down the middle and go with defense contractors. So you're basically you're working in government projects all the time, but you're a private, you're a private person and you can quit and don't get court-martialed or something. Or whatever, so there's definitely ways of going about this where you might kind of make a compromise and work with someone I think our former co-host on Nick was working for Booz Allen for a little bit, that does a lot of government contracting in cybersecurity. I think they're the ones that were doing it at JPL or something when I was visiting there. So they're going to be involved in government programs. They're going to be doing all this interesting stuff. But again, there's definitely reasons to check out the private sector too. And if you're looking for a great private sector place, you want to know where I work? So I work at Varonis, the sponsor of this stream, as Zam pointed out. And Varonis is a great company for lots of different people in cybersecurity, be them threat researchers or software developers or salespeople who want to learn about what companies really need when it comes to cybersecurity and give them a good match to make them better protected. Like there's lots, and I actually work in marketing where I get to make educational stuff for all of you. So there's lots of different roles within companies like Varonis that are really exciting. They pay well, and there's a great work environment that I truly, genuinely believe is a great place to work. So if you're interested in a good place to work in the private sector, definitely check out Varonis. I know also some of the people who worked at Rapid7 were super happy. And those are just some people I know off the top of my head that have had people I know go into those roles and then really enjoyed it. So I would say like private sector generally for me wins, but public sector has definitely got its fans and there are definitely advantages to it too. Like someone just said DARPA. All right, let's take a question from the stream, from the YouTube channel, and then we'll take another from the stream.
Cool. This one I don't entirely understand. It says, so is this how they're gonna take the internet temp offline? I think that was from my Log4j video where the Canary token site seemed to also have crashed. So I think we already addressed that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the log. No, they're asking if Log4j is how they're going to take the internet down.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean that it's contingent on the servers also being inherently flawed in like some other way, because like just having access to the servers after like if you exploit like a vulnerable version of Log4j doesn't necessarily like get you into anything. So I think that also depends on other levels of exploits already being there. But we have seen some pretty big attacks, like one we covered in last week's news stream, where like I think some Vietnamese cryptocurrency like firm got taken down or something crazy like that. And like a couple million devices were exploited.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we have a very feisty question from Dinkelberg. Most of the problems of the modern internet security come from protocols that were invented in the 80s and 90s and are still in use. Hey, okay, watch it. I was invented in the 80s/90s, and I am also still in use. So you are treading on thin ice. Wouldn't it be better to create new ones from the ground up? All right, well, now I'm offended. Okay, well, that is an interesting question, and a lot of different people will have different answers on this. So yes, some of the protocols that were developed back then have not scaled well to what the internet is today. But in implementing new protocols, things can always get worse. Oh, yeah. So there have been some interesting ideas into, I'm not going to get too much into it, but like Web3 that have distributed infrastructure that end up kind of being centralized extremely quickly based on the way that capitalism works. And that some of that stuff is an interesting idea, but in practice, a lot of it is a lot clunkier than the current internet and violates some of the rules of what people are willing to do to participate with the internet.
Yeah.
Which is like they just want to log on and be able to do stuff, and they don't really care a lot about the way that things work behind the scenes, provided that it all works. So there are also people who are trying to make cryptography more difficult to implement into products, more difficult to implement into standards because it makes it difficult to eavesdrop. These are national governments like Australia that are passing laws against encryption that might make some of these new standards basically be forced to have backdoors or other vulnerabilities that would make them worse than what we have today. So the problem is, who is creating these new standards? What is their goal? And does that align with what we want from the internet? And you're going to get lots of different answers to these questions depending on who you ask, which makes this a pretty difficult thing to really answer. In my opinion, standards like, for example, so my internet standards I deal with are Wi-Fi encryption. We have WEP from forever ago, which is easy to break in about 15 minutes. We have WPA, WPA2, then we have WPA3, which now has a bunch of built-in security features that weren't possible back when this was originally developed, which are leaps and bounds better than what we have right now on the majority of different devices. So, these kinds of incremental increases are definitely good, but they also leave open legacy attacks where I can frequently downgrade a device to, think that it's dealing with an older client, and then it'll offer some old insecure way of connecting that, is just as bad as it's always been. So backwards compatibility is a huge problem when implementing new standards, because you can't just lock every device that exists right now off of this new internet. That would create tons of e-waste and also just generally kind of be a confusing idea. So adding things like backwards compatibility makes it really difficult to have these new stringent security standards, because a lot of the ways I know of attacking the new WPA3 just involve downgrading to WPA2 and then using the same tricks that have worked for a decade. So this is a thorny question that has a lot of implementation issues and also depends on who is being asked and who's really in charge. So like inventing totally new protocols for the internet, we introduce new protocols all the time. The problem is we have to make the internet backwards compatible with so many devices that it makes it difficult to be strict about this sort of thing, which kind of defeats the purpose for a lot of these initiatives. So, I think it's an interesting question. I'm not really sure where to go beyond with that. It's just when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of implementing new things like new standards across the internet, it really matters who's involved and what their goals are. Because if it's to create backdoors in order to surveil people better, then a lot of people might accept that if it meant a faster internet that was easier to use. And that could be a problem and make things worse than it is today. All right, let's take another question. Oh, actually, let's do one from the chat. So one question was, what skills do you need to be an ethical hacker? Is it necessary to learn programming first rather than networking? So do you want to take that one first?
Oh,
I've been talking for a long time, so you can take that one for a bit.
I don't think necessarily, no. Programming is useful for automating, and generally that goes hand in hand when working with like Linux tools and stuff like that if you want to automate your attack flow. I don't think you necessarily need to know how to program unless you want to create your own malware or something like that. I think networking is definitely a fundamental, especially when it comes to stuff that we specialize in, like Wi-Fi hacking, signals intelligence, stuff like that. I think generally just knowing your way around various common toolkits, tool sets, stuff like that within Linux, having a basic understanding of how the technology you're working with actually operates and some basic protocols work. But programming isn't necessarily the most important part of your skill set.
Yeah, so I'm also assuming you don't mean the certified ethical hacker certification, because that has you have to pass a test. So then, a prep course could tell you what you need to study for that. But as somebody who has been described as an ethical hacker, it is a very loose term. Yeah. It basically means you hack, break, modify, or do stuff in a way that could be malicious, but you choose not to. And instead you do the right thing, either reporting it or using your projects for good. So you could be focused on reverse engineering, in which case, yeah, you should probably know programming, or you could be focused on penetration testing, where you just know a suite of different tools that require you to run scans, interpret the data, and then put it into the right Metasploit module, maybe, in order to exploit the target and write a report. You don't need to be a programming wizard in order to do that. In fact, you might not even need to know how to program, but I definitely recommend looking into simple modes of stringing programs together, like bash scripting or PowerShell, because these are not really programming languages. They're super easy to learn and they're incredibly useful and will supercharge what you can do. So even if you're not going to learn programming, I would still recommend learning bash scripting and PowerShell, because those are easy to learn, they're super practical, and they'll make it so you don't really, in a lot of cases, you don't need to use external tools if you can just string existing tools on a computer together into a fashion that works. I know a lot of people that get away with just doing bash scripting and PowerShell stuff, and it is really cool. So no, you don't necessarily need advanced programming skills. You don't necessarily need to go into networking. You can still know just enough to be dangerous, as they say, and be able to fulfill a specific role within the cybersecurity sphere. Like penetration testing or social engineering or something like that. So everybody has their niche, and everybody becomes an ethical hacker, with maybe slightly different goals. And that's why the term is pretty generalized when it comes to calling yourself that. If you have specific skills that you're employed for that involve hacking something ethically, then you're an ethical hacker, I would say. Even if you're not employed, provided you're in it and doing it on a regular basis, I would say it's relatively safe to call yourself that.
8-Bit Oni says, it's better to improve protocols rather than create new ones. Look at USB. They tried to make new ones and the standards got weird. Yeah, it's also hard to just like entirely overhaul protocols or create new ones when there's like organizations like the IEEE that are like overseeing like a large part of how internet infrastructure works and stuff like that. It's just like hard to create new protocols from scratch rather than like fix old ones that are already there.
So another question is just, hello everyone, when for quantum cryptography?
What?
My computer, and I have tried this, will not get cold enough to do quantum cryptography.
Where's this one?
Yeah,
Sorry.
So I'm sorry, Loki Johnson, but we are unable currently to achieve in this house the temperatures necessary for quantum computing. It's too noisy. Yeah, all my qubits keep getting flipped. So unfortunately, we're a ways out. Unless you can get me a better refrigerator, and maybe upgrade this MacBook Pro.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does PowerShell suck?
4.5. No, 5. I just remembered the way that they format stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I would say a solid like 3, 4.
Wow, that's generous. So Alex likes PowerShell more than me, apparently. But like the only thing that I don't like about PowerShell is like these ridiculous strings that they require you to write to do like pretty standard stuff. Like in Bash, like all the commands are like relatively short. But in PowerShell, it's always just like something dot network dot something and then like curly. I'm just like, what is this? Why is this so long? So memorizing to me, like memorizing PowerShell stuff, like makes you a wizard. If you know Bash scripting, I'm like, all right, like you've done some Bash scripting, that's fine. But if you know a bunch of PowerShell script from memory, I'm like, how do you remember that much text? Why is it so long? So PowerShell is super powerful, really cool. And like every time I go to my doctor's office, they leave me in a room with an unlocked computer and they're like, oh, don't worry, we do everything in the cloud, so you need to log in. And I'm just like, why do I have administrator access to PowerShell?
That's
like,
nice.
What is going on? So people frequently don't lock down PowerShell. It's just up and open. So if you're doing sneaky Windows stuff, or if you're developing PowerShell scripts, then for Windows computers, if you're developing, for example, Ducky scripts, like it's essential that you know PowerShell because it's the fastest way to do most of the things you're going to want to do. So yeah, I would say like 5, and only because of how long it is and that it is it's a little bit annoying to get into, but it's still definitely worth learning if you're mostly working with Windows computers. It'll be the fastest way to get most things you want to do in a security context done.
I also hardly know like anything about working my way around Windows or like hacking Windows stuff. I just don't like PowerShell.
Yeah, no, I prefer Bash scripting to it, but you don't get the choice when you're in Windows, except for Windows Subsystem for Linux. It does have that, which I also don't like. You can kind of mock quantum computing up with cats and boxes, but you probably shouldn't. I only have 1 cat and then like 3 boxes. So like I feel like we're not going to get a lot of cracking done with my current quantum cryptography setup. But I like the suggestion.
How do you ask a small company that doesn't have a bug bounty if I can pen test them? I don't want to get in trouble.
You will get in trouble. Yeah, you're going to get in trouble. So
just like you with McDonald's?
Yes, just like I did with McDonald's. All right. So a little context here. If you find a flaw in a company that maybe you use their product, maybe like for me, it was like I was a student and like my school forced me to use this like third-party like math learning program that had terrible security and lots of bugs. So like maybe you're interested in improving the security of that company because you're a consumer of it, or maybe you just notice that it sucks and you want to alert them to that. Small companies that do not have bug bounties, even medium companies that do not have small bug bounties, tend to be pretty crazy about this sort of thing. That's because there's like one dude or lady at the top of this organization who's kind of good at business, but for whatever reason, like hasn't gotten any bigger than they are now. Maybe they're still growing, or maybe, it's not within their capabilities. So this already struggling small business probably doesn't care about something unless it's literally about to destroy their business that is like a potential security issue, because they've got 10 other issues, with their 5 employees that they're trying to pay out of their meager, like small amount of money they're making, and they don't want to listen to it. frankly, and if you're too persistent about it, they'll interpret it as a threat and try to seek legal action in order to get you to go away. This has happened to me, and I've seen it happen to many other people. And if you go ahead without their permission, they will definitely try to seek legal recourse because they probably will not understand what it is that you're doing. So you might think that you're doing them a favor by conducting a pen test and testing their security, but if they don't want you to test it, then technically anything you do that is illegal on their system, like logging in with credentials that aren't yours, that's technically unauthorized access of a computer system. And that could get you into serious trouble if they take it the wrong way. And they might not understand that your intentions are to help them out here. So I would say approaching small businesses for an unauthorized pen test is the #1 way to get police called on you as like a young hacker. Go with a company that has a bug bounty program, or be very, very careful with the way that you're describing what it is that you're doing. People do not understand that you are not malicious. And if you don't work at a company where your job is security threat researcher or something like that, then it's going to be difficult for these people who don't interact with this industry to understand what it is you're telling them. So I would say you can work with third-party platforms like BugCrowd to do disclosure to these companies that are probably not going to be very friendly to you reaching out to them. And if you feel like you really want to improve the product and you want to go with a company that's going to help you out and do that, I would definitely recommend someone like BugCrowd or Hackeroni. Wait, how is it pronounced?
I think it's, Hacker One? Roni? I don't know.
Yeah, Hackeroni. I think you got it right.
Hackeroni, right.
Yeah, so like you can reach out
I don't know what you were referring to.
Yeah, you can reach out to either one of these bug bounty programs and basically have them help you out with disclosure if you don't want to get sued. But again, if you go in and start poking around and doing stuff you're not supposed to without permission, then you might end up still getting in trouble even if you do disclose it through a third party. So please just be aware of what you can and cannot do on another system when you don't have permission, because if they react badly to your disclosure, then anything you might have done that is potentially illegal could just get immediately forwarded to the police, who will look at it with suspicion. So yes, this is a dangerous thing to do, and I've tried to do it many times, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. I have told a medical business that they had a security camera that was broadcasting all the billing data of all of their patients open just onto the internet for anybody to see, and they actually took it down and they thanked me. But I've also had experiences where people either don't believe me or think I'm threatening them, and that is definitely why it is good to approach this subject cautiously.
Crimes are illegal.
Crimes are illegal. So can I hack them without permission? No, you can't. You'll get in trouble. In fact, during the Log4j thing, there are some businesses that like, our security company does hacks but for good, and we're going to put out hacks that make it so that we're patching the Log4j vulnerability by running unauthorized code on other people's systems. I'm just like, whoa, like that is definitely not allowed. Because if you mess that up, like in your altruism, then you have actually just bricked a bunch of people's production computers, and you're in trouble. Like lots and lots and lots of trouble. So yeah, don't be like one of those companies that tried to jump on the Log4j thing and ended up just committing crimes and then bragging about it. Think about what you're doing before you commit a crime, because as Alex has warned, crimes are illegal and
not permissible
and
by
are
law.
not permissible by law. So yeah,
Nice.
that is definitely something you want to keep in mind.
Low Earth orbit satellite internet is just another tool in the toolbox. Enables some new applications, makes others work better, but won't be the most popular connection method. What?
No. There's a question.
Oh.
How do you think new technology like Starlink will change the security/hacking world? Do you think Starlink tech is the way of the future for internet? My professor seems to talk up Starlink a lot. My question is, does your professor have Starlink? Because we do, and it's not that great. In fact, we turned it off after a while because back when we were using it about a year ago, there was we would do things like streaming like we are now on it, and it would cut out for like maybe 10 minutes every hour sometimes, like while they were still launching satellites. And some of it was like alignment issues. We were able to get it a little bit better. But the lack of continuous coverage was problematic for doing things that needed us to be connected and not just cut out randomly, which it did several times. And then we had some other issues with it, like speed and some other availability issues that made it so that we couldn't use it if we brought it outside a certain geographic area. And so it was okay, but frankly, for the other alternatives in our area, it was not that great. Now, if we were in the middle of nowhere, again, like we were originally, then it could be more of a game changer because it would enable us to do 80 to 90% of what we usually do with the internet. But that ability to do that extra 10 to 20% sometimes really matters if you're doing things that require a dedicated connection that doesn't cut out. So I would say Starlink is a really interesting idea. The actual execution of it heavily depends on where you are and whether it offers continuous coverage, because you just can't use the internet normally if it just cuts out. You just can't. So there are some pretty serious limitations still, depending on where you are geographically. The amount of satellites they have to put up in the sky is a lot. But I will say that I am fascinated by the technology, and I think that it's a really interesting way of bringing a connection to places where there's just not the traditional infrastructure to bring it, like where we used to live, where the internet was so slow, they were being sued for not being able to call 911. So in those circumstances, then Starlink is definitely a viable opportunity to maybe offer them better service, unless someone's getting murdered in that 10 minutes that there's no Starlink satellite, in which case maybe it's worse. So it's an interesting kind of back and forth. Again, we turned off our Starlink service after a while because we just really weren't using it. And where we are, it's just not necessary anymore. But back where we used to live in a very rural area, it was by far the best option we had. We just didn't get it until we were out of there. So we tried other types of satellite internet as well, like the more traditional satellite internet, and the lag was crazy. Having a signal go all the way up, like, miles up in the air and then come back down again to a base station was just creating like up to 10 to 15 seconds of delay during like phone calls. So if you're trying to use it for like a VoIP call, like it was impossible. It was actually terrible. So yeah, I would say compared to traditional satellite internet, then this is leaps and bounds better than what it used to be. But currently, it's just not better than traditional internet for most of what we're doing.
As you showed us last week, though, it is good for cat warming.
Yes. One thing it is very good for is warming up cats that might be outside in the cold. And that is something that I think is a very noble cause.
Cool. Do you want to take another question from the YouTube?
Yeah, let's take it from the YouTube channel.
Sure. Okay, this one says, also you should do a video on SDR type DIY builds like the other ones you have done with, say, the deauthor on a Wi-Fi ducky, or something to send 5 gigahertz or more at the max with a screen, and maybe go nuts and add a few other projects like the 2 mentioned all in one and call it the iHack. What's that? Okay, that's a lot to process.
Whoa. Yeah, I think they're telling us to make a flipper, like a flipper zero kind of deal.
No, that's like the exact opposite approach we wanted to take when designing the Wi-Fi nugget. Also, did you see how the like crazy supply chain issues they were having? Like the project was already set back by like a year, just like with new development work they were doing, but now due to like the silicone shortage, the flipper project has been just pushed back. Like again, it's crazy.
Yeah, it has been pretty crazy. If anybody is doing hardware stuff, you might have noticed that it is getting really difficult to source certain components. And I've seen people on Twitter talking about sourcing contracts being pushed back to 2027.
Oh my God, yeah.
Which obviously, if you're planning on releasing a product in the next year, is not acceptable. So we fortunately have not been too badly affected by this. But yeah, trying to add too much stuff right now is a bad idea. It's a good idea to keep things basic, easily sourceable, and make it so that you're not out there looking for a bunch of random components, because I don't even know what you would need to have in order to support 5 gigahertz hacking, but I imagine it would be expensive and difficult to source at the moment.
Yeah. Also, dang, I think those were also the STM32 chips that were set back to 2027, and that's exactly what the flipper is using as their main hardware component.
Hopefully
really sucks.
It's back to 2027 because they bought all of them, yeah. Because otherwise, yeah, that would be really unfortunate. There's lots of these more basic microcontrollers are being bought up quickly. And it happens in waves where like people will buy up one microcontroller and then it'll spill over to replacements that are kind of similar to that microcontroller and then replacements for those ones. So these waves of shortages can go really quickly and affect anybody who's making hardware, which is why it's been a pretty crazy year for anybody who manufactures their own hardware, and why we probably won't do any of the things that were recommended that. Although they do sound really cool. It's just that adding a lot of these features requires hardware that's difficult to source, and it would take too much stress.
Right. Someone says, will you do a Nugget 3?
Yes, we will, actually. So
Absolutely.
We're already talking about future nuggets. We have one design that nobody has seen a completed, finished, working 100% version of. Is this true?
Yes, not even us.
Yeah, not even us.
We're still waiting on
that is currently being shipped to us from China. So we have a new version of the nugget that is smaller, cuter, and more compact. It's really, really cool. So we have that version that's coming out, and then we're talking about making another CircuitPython compatible Nugget that would have lots of cool features like the ability to have SD cards and some other interesting upgrades that would make it a more useful and interesting tool. So you can stay tuned to Hack 5 for more developments on the Nugget, because we are going to be releasing the Nugget as a product on Hack 5, hopefully coming up in the next month or so. So if you want to take a look at that, we'll have more documentation and more stuff coming out with that exciting announcement, because there's now a number of different really cool projects that can run on the Nugget, such as my rubber Nugget, which I am going to be featuring. I know I featured in my last YouTube video, and I'll be featuring again soon, which is a kind of like a USB rubber ducky style Nugget that is able to eject payloads, and then also a honey Nugget, which is a honeypot Wi-Fi Nugget that connects to your Wi-Fi, pretends to be a vulnerable device, and when people try to log in, it will rat them out and send you an email. Although I think I'm going to change it to make it look like a webcam, because everybody wants to know what some random webcam is, hanging out. So, yeah. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming with that, and then also Alex is working on the Nugget Defender. Alex, what does the Nugget Defender do?
It's a network defense tool for the Wi-Fi Nugget. So I've been working on creating new tools for the D1 version of the Wi-Fi Nugget, which is a little more limited, but also has the ability to do Wi-Fi attacks that aren't quite yet implemented on the S2. So I'm basically just working on a tool that lets you see if people are hacking your network. And there's two different ways we can do this at the moment. One of them is a honeypot, like the one Kody was mentioning, which will basically trigger like an email alert if someone is trying to probe around at your network and log into a honeypot that the Nugget sets up. And then the other lets you scan for deauthentication or disassociation attacks that are being run over Wi-Fi, since those are pretty noisy and easy to pick up. Hopefully I can focus on doing some S2 development work in the future, because I'm really excited to do stuff like HID attacks and also mess around with Wi-Fi stuff on it. Because what you're doing seems really cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And also, I suck at programming a lot more than Alex, so once he's done with the Nugget Defender, we're definitely going to be working on some more projects of mine that will have better menus and stuff like that, because mine are very rudimentary. All right, so one question is, why do people in the West cry about the silicone shortage? It causes too many problems in Asia. Okay, the reason we're crying specifically is because we'll come up with a design that requires a specific component, and then when we try to make it, they say they won't have it until the next decade. And then we have to find things that work kind of sort of like that, but then everybody else has already bought those up. And in the end, it means a cascading failure of ability to source things that might mean that a design you've ordered 1,000 of suddenly can't be produced anymore. So people are losing tons of money when it comes to buying everything you need for one design and then finding out that design's not going to work anymore, having to toss out that entire design, come up with a new one, and then maybe the parts you already bought are worthless now. So another question is, should we repurpose old tech instead of buying new stuff? And this is actually something that was not viable until this shortage hit. But now there's this whole industry of places that will take your boards and take the components off of them in order to salvage them. So usually this happens during the circumstance I just explained, where some company will try to make tens of thousands of a different thing. They'll get most of the way there, and then boom, a shortage of some component or something they need to finish it happens, and they have these worthless boards that are most of the way completed or partially completed and have viable components on them, but they're assembled already. So usually this would just become e-waste, but now these components are in such short supply that there's industries where you will just ship them all of your bad boards, and they'll take all the components off and put them on new boards, which the failure rate for this is obviously a lot higher because they're ripping them off of boards and stuff. Things can happen when you're removing these little components, and also it is just a very technical process to be able to safely remove all these things that have different temperatures they can be at, be able to not mechanically shock or scratch or damage any of them. And a lot of this work is done by hand. So it's pretty crazy to me that, in the United States now, there's businesses that just rip apart your boards and give you components back or give you back finished boards, because this shortage is causing so many people lose so much money. Fortunately, we have not been among them, but that's mostly because we rely on modules, which are partially completed breakout boards that make it easy for us to source both microcontrollers and all the different things we need in order to run them. If we were in the situation where we were not buying modules and we were just buying raw components, which we might be in the near future, then we would be much more sensitive to these sorts of shortages, and we would probably have to modify our designs a lot more.
On a small level, we've had to deal with a really small redesign where one of the chips that we were going to use on the newer SMD version was just completely out of stock. I think it was the CH340 or some UART to USB converter, and then we had to pick a different chip just because of that. So yeah.
Yeah, so we've already been hit by this sort of shortage, and it's crazy having to redesign something that you've already finished and it's been done for a long time just because one random thing is missing. And sometimes like we had to get a little flexible with what we were able to use. All right, let's take another question.
Cool. I'll queue one up from our YouTube.
Oh, well, here we go. I like this question. What is your interest in analyzing unintended radio emissions from devices? This is a massive attack surface that almost no one other than the NSA studies, since radio is hard to learn or can be. Well, as you pointed out, radio is hard to learn or it can be. So we recently got a Hack RF1 that
It's in that drawer.
Okay, well, it's been organized away from me. But so we are looking to get into some of that stuff because, yes, it is really interesting some of the things that the NSA has been able to figure out, like being able to see what someone is doing by just analyzing the signals that their computer has accidentally put out just while processing. A lot of the time, these sorts of signals aren't really, nobody does testing to see that it's not leaking data, or at least people that aren't the NSA don't do this kind of testing. So there's been a lot of interesting ways of either exfiltrating data with this sort of thing, injecting malware with this sort of thing in really crazy cases, and otherwise being able to see what should be confidential information in a fashion that was never intended. So I'm interested in it, but as you pointed out, radio is kind of hard. So we just got some new equipment, and I would be really interested to see if this seems like a job for machine learning. Like based on everything I know about machine learning, like it seems like if you can just have this thing have a computer running a bunch of tasks and then like try to find ways of correlating it by just analyzing the signals and putting tons and tons of data into a machine learning algorithm, like it could probably start to look for correlations and start finding patterns. But like doing this manually seems hard. So I would probably want to get a little bit more up on like machine learning if I wanted to do that sort of thing, because you're dealing with lots of data and you're trying to fingerprint things that are really subtle and might not be immediately obvious, the connection.
We took a look at that one news piece also where they were like fingerprinting different electromagnetic emanations from computers when like certain types of malware were run on them. So like someone ran a test on like a Raspberry Pi or some like cheap single board computer like that, and they like put an electromagnetic probe like over the CPU, and using machine learning they were able to identify like what type of malware was running on the device just by like having it run over and over again and like train a neural network to identify when certain attacks are being run. So that'd be pretty interesting to see if you could do the same thing with radio.
So Andre says, I'm working on a mobile version of Tempest SDR, so you can use an antenna and Android SDR to spy on other device screens that are completely air-gapped and leave no trace, because that would be passive since you're just listening in. So like this is a good example of a passive attack that would be incredibly difficult to detect. And the reason why like the NSA, for example, likes these sorts of attacks is you're not actively hacking into anything. Instead, you're just reading unintentionally leaked data. And while this does require nuance and it does require a knowledge of how like radio receivers work and like what kinds of frequencies you need to be listening to and what kinds of data you can be decoding from this, it is a really interesting and emerging field that not a lot of people study. So Andre, props to you for doing that, because it is, I'm not going to say too hard for me, but I haven't even had the equipment to do it until pretty recently. So if you have any write-ups or if you end up doing any write-ups on it, I would love to see it, because that sounds absolutely wild. Definitely covered on Hack5 too. And of course, we'll give you credit. But yeah, that sounds wild. And also, it would be nice to be sneaky without getting caught. So that sounds like a good deal.
You want to pull up a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, this one says, so I'm wondering, seeing the faces on the Wi-Fi Nugget, is it possible to run Ponagochi on the Nugget, or am I way off? So
no, you could do that, right? Like,
I guess we could create our own derivative of the Ponagochi. We were kind of talking about that, like having a inner Nugget network where they could like communicate with each other and share like captured information and stuff like that. But no, the Ponagochi was a project I think that was created for the Raspberry Pi, specifically the Pi Zero. There's just a lot of features that you don't get on the ESP8266, and just it's designed to be like a little more, I guess like high level for what you can do with it. There's just like higher level interfaces that you can use, like to program the Wi-Fi chip over Arduino, pre-program it to do certain stuff over monitor mode, scan for attacks, or stuff like that you just really can't do on the ESP. It's kind of limited.
Yeah, there's definitely some limitations, but if you just want to slap that face on, you could definitely just copy the Ponagachi faces and slap them on there. But yeah, the functionality is not going to be the same because one of them is like a full computer and the other one is a microcontroller. And there's serious differences in something running Linux versus something that is just running the code that you put on it. So this is a great question. I'm an IT director at a government agency, and on Friday, I'm speaking to cyber students at a local university. What topics do you think cybersecurity students want to hear about?
Hacking.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah,
as Alex
hacking's
said,
real cool.
Definitely tell them about how you can blow up a femtocell with only your computer.
Oh my god. I remember getting that question.
Okay, so to answer this question seriously, if I was going to go and do this and I wanted to get people that were in a cybersecurity club or something jazzed about cybersecurity, I would do a couple things. One of them is I would highlight stories of people with different and diverse skills succeeding in the workplace and saving the day, or like being strong contributors. Like being able to connect with people who are not traditional cybersecurity candidates is essential to getting people to feel like they belong in this field. I want to hear stories of women doing well in cybersecurity. I want to hear stories of people who come from other industries that are traditionally looked down on as maybe like not the kind of work that cybersecurity people like do. I want to hear people that came from beauty school and ended up becoming great social engineers that found problems in procedures that nobody else saw. These are things that people need to hear in order to see themselves in a job in the future where they have a good career trajectory, they're accepted, and they're happy. So if you can provide stories of people who are not traditional cybersecurity candidates doing well in cybersecurity and having interesting and fulfilling jobs, I think you will do it a really good service. I would also say that making the stakes clear that there are lots of jobs in cybersecurity that need being filled. There's lots of skill sets that are super valuable, and you don't need to force yourself into like a mold in order to fit into this industry. You just need to find things that you are good at and things that you can do and enjoy, and you will find a space that works for you, provided that those skills are in demand, which most of them are. So yeah, I would just really focus on stories of people that aren't, people know about hacking, like people know about that stuff, like it's cool. But stories that are inspiring of other people who are doing well that you might not often hear. Those are things that I think people really should hear and build a bridge between where they are now and where they could be that seems reasonable and doesn't force them to become someone that they're not now. That would be my advice. Alex,
you guys
besides hacking?
Yeah, you guys did a really good video, I think, on Hack 5 about that, actually, where you covered like some stories of other people who came from different industries. Was that your guys' video?
Yeah.
That was.
So it was
switching
to hacking.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that's a really not intimidating way to get people who are interested in cybersecurity to see that they can belong and that there's like different paths they can take, and also just like a ton of different roles that are available for them. Like, for example, being able to create media like we do.
Yeah. So we have another question, and this is it legal in America for the NSA to do this? And by that, like electronic eavesdropping on screens passively. What I understand is there's a court order for them to do it legally to carry out traditional hacking, but EM reading is not traditional, so they need permission. That is such a great question. So traditionally, if law enforcement is using a surveillance tool and it involves interaction, so it involves like forcing a cellular device to connect to your Stingray or tapping a phone or something like that, you need a special reason to do that. You need a warrant, you need something in order to do that. If you were able to just use a passive device to read signals that are already in the air and then decode them into images from a screen, would you need a warrant to use that? In America, for the NSA? No, I'm guessing not. I'm guessing what they probably do is they use that thing all the time, and then when they catch some guy, they wait until they slip up some other way, and then say, that's how we caught the guy, and never talk about this tool to electronically read this, so it's never tested in court, and so that nobody ever has to answer that question. And that is how that stingrays work for a very long time. Often, prosecutors would be told to drop cases that would be forced to reveal the existence of stingrays, and they would also be told to use other evidence that was later found via the stingray as the reason for the arrest and as the reason for other subsequent searches. So the level of secrecy that was deployed for even just stingrays, which are like cellular intercept devices, was pretty extreme for a very long time. So I would not be surprised if there was a tool which works like this, which there almost definitely is. You would not need a warrant in order to deploy it if it's purely passive and it's just listening in on signals that are being deployed in the open air. The second that you're interacting with someone's device, forcing it to connect to you, or like, going to another company for a tap, that is something different. But I would imagine that if this sort of thing did exist, then they would just be using it with impunity, with internal rules, of course. But like until someone messed up, and this capability was like used in like a court case or was otherwise very obviously, like revealed, then they're probably not going to talk about it, and we'll never know. So
the NSA can do whatever they want. That's what I gotta say.
Yeah. That is my indication. So we have an errant comment in the chat that says, look into Helium smiley face. That's not from the SecurityFWD channel, and we do not endorse Helium. So that was not typed by any of us. I think that we might have had a small temporary hack. Sorry about that.
Sam says, don't inhale helium. May sound funny, but bad for you.
This is true. Yes. Helium is bad for you. So sorry about that again. We'll make sure that never happens again. Once had an employee pass out while playing with helium. Dang. All right. Whoa. Okay, so one question is, has anyone used LoRa for local communication? I feel like there's lots of untapped potential. LoRa is super cool, but the problem with LoRa is that it has a very low bandwidth when it comes to data. So you can't transmit a lot of data, but for little short messages, it's really useful for like IoT stuff or like scooters or whatever that are like exchanging little bits of information over a relatively long period of time. For continuous bursts of data or for like video streaming, it's just not going to work. So there's lots of limitations. Like you can't do like a voice call over LoRa. Like it would make no sense. So, when it comes to the kinds of applications that would be enabled by this, they're highly specific. And a lot of them also aren't tied to like arguably cryptocurrency scams. So you should check out some LoRa technology that is not dependent on crypto.
Why did helium even come up? Now I'm intrigued.
Because somebody said LoRa, and our cryptozoologist wanted to talk about something he likes.
Nice.
Yes. So LoRa is a really interesting technology, and it does allow devices to communicate over miles with short messages that don't have a lot of data. The problem is, obviously, there's not a lot you can do with it, but for hackers, it's really interesting because things like authentication and other sorts of protocols are, open for poking around. So the limitation I have with LoRa is, I have nothing that supports it. I don't have, a LoRa adapter or something the same way I have a wireless network adapter. So a lot of these applications are just not as easy to explore. I can't just get on, Burp Suite and start, playing around with it. The same way I would play with local protocols via HTTP, or maybe I can use Burp Suite with it. I don't friggin' know because I don't have a device that lets me use it. So it's really interesting. It's used for a variety of IoT applications, and I feel like if you go fudging around with the way that it works, you could probably get a bunch of scooters to break. So, so I fully support that. And if you want to get into scooter braking, then please let me know what hardware setup you're most interested in. I think that some of our SDR stuff can read LoRa signals, so we can read the raw packets and stuff, but being able to interpret it in Wireshark and things like that, I'm still kind of a ways off from. So maybe we'll learn about LoRa. I think my next thing is going to be Burp Suite. I've been watching some of our researchers at Varonis use Burp Suite, and it's so cool. And I've also been using it for some of my own projects, learning about web requests and post requests and things like that for some Nugget-related stuff. So that's probably where I'm going to be focusing on next, but after that, perhaps.
I think you'd probably have a better shot in Wireshark, maybe, if you're going to do packet analysis stuff.
Well, it depends, because also
Is Burp Suite request specific, or can you also do other packets?
You can do other types of packets.
Oh, cool.
So you can do it's basically application specific stuff. So if you have LoRa messages going back and forth, you should still be able to see them.
Oh, nice.
Provided they're going through a proxy.
That's something I want to get more into too. So that's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, so and obviously Wireshark supports a lot of stuff too. So Wireshark would be good stuff to look at the individual packets, but then going into the application stuff, maybe you could poke around with that and look at authentication or things like that. So there's lots of interesting IoT applications. And again, it is a lot of IoT stuff or industrial control stuff that tends to use this. So definitely interesting if you want to get into that field of hacking.
Yeah. Alex and Kody, what's your favorite hacker movie and why?
We've watched some really good ones recently. Alex just watched The Matrix for the first time ever
last
night.
Don't shame me like that.
What?
You can't let them know I'm
Whatever. We've been on a binge of good hacker movies. What's your favorite so far?
Oh god, I forgot the name of it. There's this weird movie where two kids hack into this huge mainframe or something crazy like that. But
are you talking about war games?
Yes, that one's just ridiculously blown out of proportion. I think that one's ridiculous.
Look, somebody else hasn't seen The Matrix yet.
Oh, nice.
Was it good?
Yeah, I think it was pretty good.
Yeah. So my favorite hacking movie, probably Battle Royale is arguably a hacking movie. I submit. It has hacking in it, and it's a major plot point.
In the same sense that I guess you could consider the Minions a hacking movie. There's like 2 hacking scenes in there.
Okay, yes. That's
I gotta
fair.
say, mine is the Minions.
You haven't even seen Minions. You've only seen Despicable Me.
Oh, well, that. Same
okay,
thing.
all right.
Same
So
difference.
his favorite hacking movie is Despicable Me, which is great. My favorite is probably actually Ghost in the Shell, because like hacking and like cybernetic societies and like transhumanism stuff like all plays a pretty significant role. So I really like Ghost in the Shell. It's probably my favorite.
I forgot about that one. Okay, I gotta say that actually takes the cake. That one's pretty sick.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
There's also this other anime where there's like these 2 kids that are like counter-terrorists, and they like solder together like all this cool stuff and like hack into a bunch of like government agencies or whatever. But it's an anime called Zonky no Terror. That one's also pretty great.
Nice. Can I find it on my anime list?
You sure can.
All right, cool. So one question is, Null Space Labs meetup in Burbank. Are there any things I should know before deciding to go? So I've been going to Null Space Labs for like, oh my gosh, like 5 years or something, back when it was like two spots ago. And like when I first went to Null Space Labs, I had no idea what to expect. I went on one of the public nights, and there were just a bunch of people kind of hanging out and doing stuff, and I didn't really feel like participating that much. I got the tour, I thought it was nice, and then I sat down and what was I? Oh, I was using Wireshark with a friend just in the corner, and like some of the regulars came over, like, packets! Someone's sniffing packets over here! Some guys over here sniffing packets! And I was just like, oh god. So like I just found them to be like not like rowdy, but just like fun. They're like fun. Like they'll come over and like talk to you a little bit. Like they'll crack jokes and stuff. Like like it was a very relaxed and cool environment there. Like I just came with like a project and like to work on and like questions, and I really enjoyed myself. Like I would say, like if you're willing to like talk a little bit about yourself, like ask questions and like explore the space, like there's lots of really cool things there. And frankly, it's a good event space. Like we've taught lots of classes at Null Space Labs, which were super fun. I really like the people there. So obviously be safe. The pandemic's not over, and that's why we're not currently there hanging out. So unfortunately, you won't find us at Null Space Labs at least for another couple months. But I will say it's a great experience. It's a wonderful place to check out, and it has been our like kind of hacker home away from home that we visit every time that we're in LA. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I mean, if you want to go to classes there, they have lockpicking classes, they have other stuff. And if you feel like you have something to contribute, you can teach your own classes there, and they'll help you promote it, bring people in, and it's kind of nice. We don't really do it for the money. We do it through the ability to donate some of the ticket money to the hackerspace, so they have some extra budget, and then also just to meet other people who are interested in similar things. So if you're around Los Angeles, Null Space Labs is definitely our favorite hackerspace there. It's our little like embassy. So definitely go check it out, grab a sticker, slap it on your laptop.
That's also where we like shot one of our first episodes together on like war skating.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think on our SecurityFWD channel, if you look at one of our earliest episodes, also you'll find that there. Yeah. Cool. So I think we're almost out of time. I want to thank everybody who has been super active in the chat today. And I see somebody else has a packet sniffing addiction as well. I'm so sorry, but we're kindred souls. Someone also called me Alex with an I think. Oh, all right. Well. Like Alexi? All right, then. All right. So anyway, so I think this is pretty much all the time we have for today. If you guys have any additional questions you would like us to answer, please drop them in the YouTube channel, SecurityFWD, and we'll make sure to answer them during the next stream. And again, thank you for everyone for your insightful questions about hacking industry, getting into hacking, public versus private sector. We had lots of really good ones today, and I really enjoyed answering them. And Alex, thank you for being here as well to talk about some of your Hack 5 episodes and what it's like getting into hacking. Yeah. All right, everyone. So make sure to check out our next stream on Friday, where we'll be going over the hacking news. Make sure to subscribe if it's your first time here to the SecurityFWD channel, so you'll be notified when we go live, and we will see you next time. Bye.